Hello, this is the Council on Independent Fundamental Bible Doctrine. I am beginning my next video series titled The Revelation Timeline. This differs from the Rapture Timeline in that the Rapture Timeline was basically focused on showing that the wrath of God is not in the tribulation, but is in the day of the Lord. Okay, this one is going to be more broader. It's going to encompass other things as well, though it will still show us many times that the wrath of God is in the day of the Lord, not in the 70th week. And the rapture timeline will be more defined by some of these things as well, even though this is a broader series. Okay? But let's go ahead and get started. Let's look at it. The first video is titled The Burden of Babylon. Revelation 16:17, Babylon's destruction. And the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air. There was a great earthquake, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came into remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath, God's wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found, and there fell upon man great hail out of heaven. So Babylon's destruction is at the seventh vial bowl judgment. Right. Well, let's look at what the burden of Babylon is in the Old Testament. Isaiah 13:1, the burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz did see. Isaiah 13:4, the noise of the multitude in the mountains, like as a great people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts mustereth the host of the battle. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord, and the weapon of his indignation, to destroy the whole land. Howl ye, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. What just happened? Okay. Babylon is being destroyed in the day of the Lord. That's big, people. Okay? And this is not like talking about historical Babylon. This is talking about spiritual Babylon, the one that moves with the seat of power. You know, the eight kingdoms, and the eighth is the Antichrist. Now, whether this is the seventh or the eighth, you know, it's kind of hard to say whether the eighth is the Antichrist after this one is destroyed, or whether this one was the Antichrist and it, you know, I don't really, I'm not looking at that particular piece of it. But as far as it relates to the timeline, it's very telling. Okay, this is incredibly telling. Okay, and what does it tell us? Well, let's look. So let us reason together. If Babylon is destroyed in the wrath, which it is, at the seventh vial bowl judgment, okay, that would be towards the end of the wrath, right before his second return. And Babylon is destroyed in the day of the Lord. Okay, so it's destroyed in the wrath and it's destroyed in the day of the Lord. Then the wrath is in the day of the Lord, as we've been looking at. But Babylon is destroyed at the seventh vial judgment in the day of the Lord, before the second return of Christ. In the day of the Lord, before the second return of Christ. In the day of the Lord, before the second return of Christ. So the second return is not the sun, moon, stars, day of the Lord return, as the day of the Lord has already began before the second return. Because Babylon is destroyed in the day of the Lord, before the second return of Christ. So the day of the Lord can't be at the second return if it's already going. If the day of the Lord is not the second return, then that only leaves one other return. Yeah, the first one. The first return at the herald of the day of the Lord and his wrath, then his wrath through the seventh vial bowl judgment that destroys Babylon, and then the second return after the destruction of Babylon in the day of the Lord. So we're already in the day of the Lord before the second return. That means the second return is not the herald of the day of the Lord and his wrath's arrival. The first return is the day of the Lord and the herald of his wrath's arrival. Then you have the wrath, culminating with the destruction of Babylon at the seventh vial bowl judgment. Then you have Christ's second return. So the second return is not the herald of the beginning of the day of the Lord and his wrath. That's the return at the first return. See? That, my friends, is the burden of Babylon. Babylon is destroyed in the wrath at the seventh vial bowl judgment before the second return. And it's destroyed in the day of the Lord. So that wrath is in the day of the Lord. Before we ever get to the second return, we're already in the day of the Lord. Already in the day of the Lord. So when did it start? At the first return. At its herald that it's getting ready to start. At the first return. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun goes dark, the moon goes dark, stars fall from heaven, earth is moved, heaven is moved, men mourn as they see the face of Christ coming in the clouds, and he's bringing his wrath. Then his wrath, culminating with the seventh vial, seventh bowl, then the second return. The destruction of Babylon occurs in the wrath in the day of the Lord, already began and progressing when the second return of Christ occurs after the wrath. Okay? Thanks a lot. This is the way these are going to be, a little more quicker, a little more broken down, and a little more broader in the meanings that we can pull from them. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.